العربية السورية.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. Permit me at the outset to extend, in the name of the government of the Syrian Arab Republic, our condolences to the government and people of Nigeria, given the terrorist acts that battered Kano and Tus cities and took the toll of hundreds of innocent civilians. We sympathize with the relatives of the victims. I would like to start my statement with this condolence because all of us around this round table feel the enormity of terrorism. None of you feels that as we the Syrians feel it. Mr. President, some member states introducing this draft resolution while dealing with the Syrian situation remind me of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the novel of the Scottish writer Robert Stevenson. Those states are trying to impersonate the role of Dr. Jekyll, the good guy, by promoting noble principles, while in reality they represent Mr. Hyde, the evil guy. This evil role is manifested through their involvement in backing terrorism in Syria and contributing to the continuation of Syrian bloodshed and shedding crocodile tears over bloodshed in Syria. The hands of Mr. Hyde, ladies and gentlemen, are stained with Syrian blood, although he falsely claims his friendship for the Syrian people. So much so that even the former president of the so-called Syrian coalition, mentioned by my colleague, the permanent representative of the Russian Federation, I say the former president of so-called Syrian coalition, a coalition pre-orchestrated and manufactured by those who call themselves friends of the Syrian people, described himself a few days ago, those friends, and I quote, half of them are liars, imposters, and hypocrites, and they are responsible for the conditions we are witnessing today in Syria, adding that the West seeks to partition Syria, end of quote. This is the statement of a former president of the Doha coalition that was manufactured in well-known capitals. It is a mere coincidence that history presents lots of evidence authenticating this fact. On this day in 1945, the Syrian delegation was participating in the San Francisco Conference for the efforts of drafting the Charter of the United Nations, during which a formulation of Article 78 of the UN Charter was reached, and it guaranteed that Syria would not become a territory under French mandate. Dear colleagues, the occupying French authorities on the day of May 29, 1945, bombed the Syrian parliament and killed its garrison. Thus, since war crimes are not subject to the statute of limitation, as we heard, we demand that the Security Council hold the French government accountable for the crimes that were committed against the Syrians and the peoples of many countries it had previously occupied and looted their resources. We call upon the French government to apologize in public and to pay compensation to our people. We wish to assure that the Syrian people will not forget the Sykes-Picot Agreement and also the subsequent dislodging of the Syrian Iskandron region by France and handing it to Turkey. In addition, the people of our region will never turn a blind eye to the fact that France is the one who introduced Israeli nuclear terrorism to the region. Mr. President, the structure of international legal system is based on fundamental pillars, most important of which is the fact that states hold the primary responsibility and exclusive responsibility for accountability and establishing justice on their territory. As a result of the regrettable events affecting my country, the Syrian government has taken a series of measures designed to hold accountable those involved in the events and to take legal action against them accordingly. The National Investigation Committee continues to do its job in parallel with the Syrian judiciary, which is looking into thousands of cases since the start of the crisis, 30,000 cases, and has issued rulings for those involved and has settled the conditions of others. This confirms the desire and ability of the Syrian government to achieve justice and negates any pretext to involve any international judicial body that clashes with our national judiciary powers. The Syrian crisis has unveiled the level of hegemony of double standards on the mechanisms of the United Nations and using them to target certain member states in specific regions in the world in the name of law and justice. As a continuation of this approach, a group of member states submitted the draft resolution before us today, a draft that is apolitical, discriminatory, and interventionist par excellence. This draft aims at disturbing the presidential elections in Syria and reshuffling the cards, fueling the crisis, and achieving the goals of a propaganda show. This draft seeks to involve the Security Council in the hysteria of hostility adopted by some member states towards Syria and its people. Tabling this draft resolution represents a ceaseless attempt by some states to arrogate to themselves the right to be custodians of the Syrian people and its national choices. This attempt constitutes an open disregard for the will of the Syrian people and starkly contradicts the recurrent confirmation of the Security Council of its strong commitment to the sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic, its independence, unity, and territorial integrity, and to the call for a Syrian-led political solution for the Syrian crisis. Moreover, the grounds presented by the sponsors to justify the request of referral to the ICC are nothing but mendacious allegations and fabricated lies contained in politicized and biased reports that absolutely defy reason. Those reports are provided by committees that ignored all the complaints, documents, evidence, and proofs provided by the Syrian government. Those reports effectively contribute to serving the agendas of states engaged in hostile campaign against my country, Syria. Mr. President, the Syrian Arab Republic believes in international criminal justice and was among the active states during the Rome Conference, which adopted the International Criminal Court Statute. Syria was among its initial signatories. The Syrian perspective stems from the need for justice to be inclusive and transparent, far from being politicized, selective, and subject to double standards. Against this background, Syria called for the inclusion of the crime of aggression in the court's jurisdiction as the mother of all crimes. However, that was turned down. Therefore, my country has not ratified the Rome Statute. Today, the government of the Syrian Arab Republic emphasizes that the achievement of justice requires the following. First, holding accountable the governments of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, France, Israel, and other states that are inciting openly violence and terrorism, including those through funding, arming, sponsoring, training, recruiting, and facilitating the crossing of thousands of mercenaries and terrorists coming from the different parts of the world to Syria, and not only turning a blind eye to their crimes and also describing them as moderate opposition. I would like to convey to you a piece of news mentioned by the Commander-in-Chief of the air weapon of Libya. He said that the terrorist Qaeda organization in Libya and the Muslim Brotherhood in Libya together, they sent 224 air flights from Libya to Turkey and from there to Syria to transfer the terrorist mercenaries to Syria. Mr. President, the balance of international justice and the rule of law will not be set right without putting an end to the practices of those states and their violations of international law and Security Council resolutions related to combating international terrorism. Terrorism is a crime, regardless of who perpetrates it, where or why it is committed. Since the terrorism practiced by Boko Haram in Nigeria is unanimously condemned, it must be countered by equal condemnation to their counterparts sponsored by Israel in the separation area in the occupied Syrian Golan, and who are backed and recruited by Turkey in the north, and who are armed by Western and Arab governments in full view of the United Nations. Those terrorists have committed unspeakable crimes that shame human conscience, most recently cutting the water supply to the city of Aleppo and depriving about 3 million Syrians of drinking water and sanitation. We would have wished to see the state submitting this draft resolution, tabling instead a draft resolution to combat terrorism suffered by the Syrians. Second, accountability for documented war crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts of aggression and occupation perpetrated by Israeli occupation authorities in the occupied Arab territories, including the occupied Syrian Golan for over 7 decades, is absent. Those crimes have been committed with the support of some permanent members in this esteemed council who so far have enabled the Israeli war criminals to escape punishment and obstructed all initiatives to hold them accountable. Third, refraining from the attempts undermining justice through immunities some of the great powers made exclusive for themselves. This has assisted those powers in escaping any accountability for human rights violations and the crimes committed by them in other member states of this organization in order to implement colonial agendas and schemes of domination and oppression. Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, the bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, inundating Libya with blood, secret prisons using drones to kill innocent civilians, the practices of mercenary companies such as Blackwater in Iraq and others are vivid examples of double standards and escaping accountability and punishment. It is ironic that these countries continue their attempts to impose their national legislation beyond their borders and recently imposed sanctions on the head of the National Relief Committee in Syria while paying lip service to their alleged support for the Syrian people. Imagine that sanctions have been imposed on the head of the National Relief Committee, humanitarian relief in Syria. Valerie Amos knows the head of the National Relief Committee in Syria, and I will refer these sanctions to her. Hopefully she will do something. Those lots of evidence, among others, highlight that justice is tailored to fit the measurements of targeted states. A crime may be prefabricated for some states in order to refer them to the state, while others are shielded by a curtain that blocks the view of their documented crimes and violations. This draft resolution has been formulated in a way that protects holding accountable Israeli war criminals for their crimes against the Syrian people. Its draft keeps foreign terrorists and mercenaries coming from other countries independent from the court's jurisdiction. This process undermines the credibility of its drafter and exposes their malicious intents and aggressive motives. Once again, as we are talking about the sanctions imposed on the head of the National Relief Committee, I would like to remind you of another scandal that took place when sanctions were imposed on the Minister of Electricity in Syria. We referred the matter of the head of the National Relief Committee in Syria to Valerie Amos, and we will refer the sanctions on the Minister of Electricity to the court of Tommy Edison. Once again, my delegation assures that all member states who claim their concern for Syria and its people that the way to help the Syrian people is clear and well known, and it is by exerting sincere and serious efforts to fight terrorism which targets Syria and its people. It is also through supporting the efforts aiming at finding a national solution to the Syrian crisis. The solution should take into consideration Geneva process, which is based on dialogue among Syrians themselves in order to reach consensus on rejecting violence, combating terrorism, and establishing a national unity government away from attempts to impose guardianship and interventionist agendas that do not mean any good for Syria nor its people. Syrians who will go to the polls to elect the President of the Republic are doing so to protect their country from terrorism, creative chaos, and the attempts to undermine the concepts of the state and sovereignty altogether. In concluding, Mr. President, seems that the current French government has understood erroneously the famous phrase in French literature that say hell is the others, l'enfer c'est les autres, in terms of the belief that others are always an embodiment of hell, while what the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre meant of this phrase in that hell might be yourself and your view of others, as well as the way you interact with them. Therefore, the French government should look at itself first, so it might see hell in its actions and behaviors and not in others. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for his statement. The representative of France has asked for